All right. Well, we'll get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Nougier. I am the head of research and communications at the International Drug Policy Consortium. First of all, please select your language channel, so you can choose between English, French, and Spanish. And you can just do that by selecting the little globe interpretation at the bottom of your screen. And I'm going to say that in French and Spanish just to make sure that everybody got the message. Donc, bonjour à toutes et à tous, je suis Marie Nougier du Consortium international sur les politiques des drogues. Avant de commencer, choisissez votre langue. On a interprétation aujourd'hui en anglais, en français et en espagnol. Il vous suffit de choisir l'option interprétation sur votre écran. Buenos días, buenas tardes a todas y todos. Soy Marie Nougier del IDPC, Consorcio Internacional de Políticas sobre Drogas. Para empezar, por favor, pueden escoger su lenguaje de interpretación. Tenemos inglés, francés y español. Solamente tiene que empujar sobre el globo abajo con su pantalla y pueden escoger su idioma. All right, should I get started, Juan, you think? There's enough people in the room?
Sounds great.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so today we are going to talk about the 68th session of the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs. So this is going to be happening from the 10th to the 14th of March in Vienna. And so the idea of this webinar is to provide a space for us to talk a little bit about the key discussions and events that will be happening and share some experience from the membership on how to best engage in Vienna. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to use the chat functionality or the Q&A in Zoom, and that will enable us to go back to these questions at the end and have space to answer them. If we don't have time to answer all the questions, which I doubt, but in any case, you can always send us emails. So you can contact us at contact@idpc.net, and then we will do our best to respond as fast as we can. So a couple of words about IDPC before we go into the actual webinar. For those who don't know us, we are a global network of NGOs. So we have members from over 70 countries, I think, around the world. And we come together to try and repair the harms of punitive drug policies and promote just responses grounded in health and in social justice and in human rights. Just a quick note as well, if you would like to introduce yourselves in the chat so that we know who's in the room, feel free to do that. Please write your name, name of your organization, and the country that you're based in, just so that people know who is who. Okay. Another thing, a few years back, we produced a CND 101 video, which includes basically some basic information about the CND. What is the CND? How does it work? And how can you engage as civil society? So we encourage you to have a quick look. It's 10 minutes, but it's a nice complement to this webinar. So please feel free to have a look and to share with other colleagues that you know will be going to the CND. And so in terms of the structure of this webinar, we're going to start, I'm going to start with key information about what to expect this year, what will be the key debates in the plenary in particular. Then I will run you through the 6 resolutions that are being tabled this year. I'll brief you through some of the key events that are also going to happen at the CND. And then we will hear from 3 wonderful colleagues who are joining us today to talk about key on-the-ground experiences. So they have gone to CND before, and we thought these webinars are a great opportunity for them to just talk about what they did there. Why did they go to CND? What did they do there? What was their key objective? And what did they achieve? So we are joined today by Beatrix from Youthrise, Michel Wazan from Skoun in Lebanon, and Silvie Ojeda from Metzineres, Spain, but also she's based in Rio. After their experiences, we'll have a little bit of time for my colleague Juan Fernandez Ochoa to run us through some of the key useful resources that are available for NGOs as they attend the CND, and we'll finish with a Q&A. So in terms of your participation, if you are planning on attending the CND, remember that you have to register. Registration is open via Indico until the 3rd of March, so it usually closes 1 week before the CND starts. So you will need an official letter from an NGO that is ECOSOC accredited, and then once you have that letter, you are able to register on Indico and upload that letter there to prove that you're accredited. If you have any problems, just let us know, but it should be relatively straightforward. So in terms of this year's CND, India has the chair of the CND this year. It means that they will be chairing the whole of the CND, but in particular, the plenary session. And then the vice chair this year will be Armenia. So it will be the Armenian ambassador in Vienna. And that means that they will be chairing the committee of the whole where negotiations on resolutions are happening throughout the week. So if you want to take a look at the agenda for the week, I'm not going to go through all the agenda items, but we just wanted to show you this. So basically, the plenary session will start on Monday morning and end on Friday afternoon. The committee of the whole, where the negotiations are taking place for resolutions, will start on Monday afternoon and run all the way to the Friday morning. We were also told this year that there will be no evening sessions. I think it's for budgetary reasons. So we'll see if that's the case. In the past, we've had quite a few evening sessions, in particular for the committee of the whole, when negotiations are particularly difficult. But it doesn't seem that it will be the case this year. And something else that is different from previous years as well is that side events this year will be held in parallel with the main proceedings, apart from a couple of slots that you can see here at lunchtime, but the rest will be held throughout the CND. So you can have a look. There's going to be a lot of side events. I think there's 190 this year. So plan ahead if you're trying to go to some of these. Okay, so for now, I would like to move on to the key issues that are likely to come up at the plenary. The agenda for the session is available on the CND website. It includes all the usual agenda items, so feel free to take a look. Something to note is if you're interested in checking the scheduling of new substances, the votes usually take place on Wednesday morning. And at that time, the committee of the whole is suspended. But so here I really wanted to present some of the highlights and key issues that are likely to shape the discussions. And unsurprisingly, one of the key issues that will likely come up is the positioning of the US, the new US administration on drug policy under Trump's leadership. We've all known, and many of us have been victims already of the really incredible shift in positioning of the US on many issues. So it looks like diplomats in Vienna haven't really received much instructions from their capital, from the US, from Washington, D.C. No ambassador is currently in place in Vienna. But obviously, you know, it's very, very likely that the narrative will drastically shift from what we've seen in the previous years. It's likely that the US will promote more of a war on drugs, war on organized crime rationale, much less on health, very, very little on harm reduction. So it's going to be a big shift, and it's going to really shape, I think, the debates and also the strategy of progressive member states in terms of how we can counter that really harmful narrative. The ongoing wars in Ukraine, in Palestine, in the Middle East, and elsewhere will also likely shape the discussions in Vienna. We've seen this happening in other UN settings, so it's likely that it will happen at the CND as well. What we have seen in other settings was some member states refusing to negotiate with others, some states using their country statements to condemn the wars, and some states using UN forums to push for language that condemns the wars. So there's like a few ways that's been happening in other settings that will likely transpire as well at the CND. So we'll see how that takes place. Now, looking more at drug-specific discussions, this year, a key element that will likely be at the forefront of the session will be calls for reform of the UN drug control regime. We have seen this last year already during the high-level segment, and it's very, very likely that this year, again, there will be calls for this to take place. Also bearing in mind that Colombia is pushing for a resolution this year on this very topic. And I'll say that a little bit more on that in a minute. Another key element that's likely to come up prominently and that is linked to the need for UN system reform is human rights. There is increasing condemnations of the human rights abuses committed in the name of drug control. And as for some of you who don't know, a key issue that is related to human rights is the rights of indigenous peoples. And the World Health Organization is currently conducting a critical review of the Coca leaf. So this is likely going to come up in the discussions this year again. And finally, it's likely that we will have some discussions around harm reduction again this year. So for those who have been following the discussions last year, there was a very strong focus on harm reduction with the US resolution in particular on overdose, where for the first time harm reduction was included in the CND resolution, the term harm reduction. We don't know quite yet to what extent member states will continue pushing for this year, in particular bearing in mind the shift in the US position that will play a big role in terms of the strategy of member states in terms of whether they want to consolidate the gains from last year and push forward, or whether they want to keep what they've managed to achieve last year in a different political context. Obviously, from civil society side, we'll be very much strongly pushing for harm reduction and for funding for harm reduction in particular. Okay, so now moving on to the resolutions. So there's going to be 6 resolutions this year. They've all been tabled. They will very soon be available on the CND website. The link is there. If you go on the main CND webpage, you will also find the link directly. What's interesting this year, and it's been a trend in the past few years, is that all the resolutions are submitted by progressive member states. In the past, it used to be mostly resolutions by conservative states and a few by progressive member states. And since COVID, we've seen a shift in that, and more resolutions are being only presented by progressive states. And it could be seen as a good thing, but actually in practice, it's quite difficult for member states to negotiate, the progressive member states to negotiate, because they have less ammunitions to trade good language across more or less progressive resolutions. So the negotiations tactics end up being quite different if the resolutions are only presented by progressive states. It's just something to bear in mind. Okay, so the first resolution is what we call Resolution L2, and this one is presented by Chile, and it's focusing on prevention amongst children. I think for this one, really the resolution is an opportunity to consolidate some of the positive language from some previous resolutions. There have been many resolutions on prevention before, some of them better than others. But yeah, this one is an opportunity to push for better language, in particular, the need for non-stigmatizing language, the need to avoid scare tactics, the need to involve young people and youth-led organizations in prevention campaigns, the need for evaluations and quality standards in prevention interventions. And also something that's important in these prevention resolutions is to make sure that there's a recognition that prevention is part of a comprehensive approach that should also include harm reduction, that should also include treatment, and all of this should be human rights based. So we hope that these elements will come up in the negotiations and in the final text. Moving on to the second resolution. This one is being presented by Thailand, and it's on the treatment of stimulant use disorders. So again, there's been many resolutions on treatment before. We hope that some of the positive language that has been adopted in the previous years on quality treatment and evidence-based treatment is consolidated here. Some key elements that we hope will come up. One of them is the need to push for voluntary treatment. We all know that it's not the case in many parts of the world, so that's a key issue. The need to recognize the role played by civil society and in particular peers in the design and delivery of treatment services. The link with harm reduction interventions, again. And finally, something that has been lacking in some of these treatment resolutions is the recognition of the barrier caused by criminalization and other forms of punishment in accessing treatment. So again, we hope that these issues will come up. Number 4. This is, number 3, but L4. This is the annual resolution on alternative development. So this is a resolution that is generally pushed by Peru, Germany, and Thailand every year. This year, it's going to be relatively procedural in nature. The idea would be to consolidate the United Nations guiding principles on alternative development, with a view to create an annex to what's already there, just to complement the guiding principles. So for us, really, I think the most important thing is to make sure that the resolution includes language that ensures the involvement of civil society and affected communities in the drafting of that annex. And that's something that we hope governments will push for. Resolution L5. So this is the key resolution that will be pushed for by Poland on behalf of the EU this year. Not much to say on this one. It's on the safety of officers in the dismantling of synthetic opioid laboratories. So it's a very specific resolution. What we want to see in there is language that protects the health and rights for all, and also language around protecting the environment in these operations. But yeah, this is a fairly specific kind of resolution. Now, L6 is probably going to be the most exciting resolution this year, also probably the most explosive and controversial. It's basically a call for a review of the global drug control regime. It was tabled by Colombia, and it's probably going to be very difficult to negotiate. Colombia will likely have to water down some of the language that's already in there to get support from member states. But it is very likely that this resolution will go for a vote, because it's unlikely that all member states will be able to agree on this one. And finally, L7 is focusing on tackling the impact of drugs on the environment. This is presented by France and Brazil, and the idea is to continue to give visibility to environmental considerations at the CND. So it's positive that this has been tabled. In the past, most of the discussions around the environment were really focusing on alternative development and the environment. So this is also a good opportunity to expand the protection of the environment beyond just alternative development. So we'll see how the discussion shapes up on that one. So that's it for the resolutions. Just a word on other events before I give the floor to our NGO colleagues. As I said, there will be 190 side events this year. All of the side events information this year will be posted on the UN journal. So it's like a different way of functioning. Before, that used to be just in the main program of the CND. So we'll see how that works out. But yes, do check the UN journal regularly, where all the information will be, and the links as well for the hybrid side events. There will also be informal dialogues for NGOs with heads of or representatives of key UN agencies. including UNODC, the INCB, and the CND. So these have been confirmed, and you have the dates and times here on this slide. The dialogues with the World Health Organization, OHCHR, UNAIDS, and UNDP, they are still to be confirmed in terms of the dates and times. So the Vienna NGO Committee on Drugs will share that information as soon as possible. And the Vienna NGO Committee on Drugs also usually organizes a civil society briefing on the first day of the CND. So that will be held on Monday morning at 9:15 a.m. in EMS3. So I encourage you to go to these because they are helpful in terms of seeing what are the key things that civil society needs to bear in mind for the week. So I'm going to stop here, and I am going to introduce Beatrix Vaz from Youthrise, who's going to share her experience at CND.
Thank you so much, Marie, and then thank you very much to IDPC for the invitation and for organizing this webinar. It's always very useful, and it's always a pleasure to be here. And it's been very exciting to get the opportunity to reflect on my experience with CND, actually, as I was preparing for this. I first attended the Commission on Narcotic Drugs in 2020, so this will be year 6. And I first got involved through the Paradigma Coalition that Youthrise, my organization, is also a member of. And the Paradigma Coalition has focused on capacitating youth-led organizations to participate in the proceedings of the CND. And I got involved in this work, and I was very interested to attend CND for the first time because I was actually struggling a lot with finding allies at home within the backdrop of a shrinking civil society space. It made advocacy quite difficult, but also connecting with others. So I was looking kind of internationally for allies, and that's where this opportunity emerged. And I guess, yeah, I got stuck with CND ever since because it was really a really whirlwind of opportunities everywhere. When I first got involved, youth organizations were going through quite a challenging time, a lot of organizational transitions. So we did not necessarily have strong connections at the CND to member states or to UN agencies. So it was a very exciting kind of grassroots organizing time. And I remember that one of my first big engagements was getting selected through an open call by the Vienna NGO Committee to speak on a side event that was organized by the UNODC's prevention section. And it was also exciting for us as Youthrise because it was one of the first opportunities that we got to share or work on prevention and treatment topics from a youth-friendly perspective with UN agencies and member states, given this backdrop of a lot of us having difficult connections to member states otherwise. And in terms of strategies with the youth organizations, we've always had a big focus on side events. So that's what I wanted to talk a little bit more about. We've always made it a mission to try to attend as many relevant side events as possible, focused on youth-specific topics particularly. But also we were always on the lookout for engaging with perspectives and organizations who we might not know or might not necessarily agree with. And we've used this as an opportunity to go and listen, but also ask a lot of questions and initiate dialogue and follow up. And I feel like this has been very helpful for us, not just in terms of connecting with a lot of friendly and other organizations, but also in terms of finding common ground on a lot of the issues that we work on. And this has also given us a lot of exposure, and I feel like a better understanding of what youth advocacy for drug policy reform has meant and what we stand for as youth organizations at CND. So I've learned a lot from these interactions with civil society, and then it has given me a lot of opportunities, which was also why I decided to run for the elections of the board of the Vienna NGO Committee, which, as you know, is an umbrella organization coordinating civil society engagement with the Vienna-based bodies. Um, because at the time there was no representation of young people and people who use drugs on the board. So I was very excited and I'm very proud to have this opportunity to be serving my second term currently and be a small part of making sure that we have meaningful civil society engagement at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs. Um, it's We've already mentioned a lot of things going on in the world, and civil society space is constantly also under a lot of threat. There's an environment of competition in this limited space that we are allowed to have. So it's interesting how sometimes we can lose sight of what's really important and how our goals are usually more aligned than we might think. But it has been a big lesson learned for me in the past couple of years of engaging with CND that while the advocacy work that we are able to do at the CND is very, very important, there's also an opportunity there in building strong alliances amongst ourselves. And this can help our work a lot in the long term as well. So that's what I wanted to highlight. And in terms of a little bit more practical tips for attending CND, I know my colleagues will also share some. People usually mention the coffee is not that great. I remember last year, my personal coffee tip for CND is that member states, there's an exhibition area inside the UN, the Rotunda, where member states have exhibitions, and some of them have stands where they actually offer coffee. A lot of these stands are to showcase crop substitution programs, and that coffee is also grown as part of that. Sort of a funny or less funny rule of thumb is that the worse the drug policies of the country, usually the better the coffee. So do check that out. It's also free. And yeah, I just finally want to make a note that CND is very stressful. I think it's also important to remember that this is the high headquarters of prohibition, so it's not a friendly environment necessarily, and there will be high stress situations throughout the week. And I know we are also exposed to a lot of stressful and difficult situations in our daily work. So just a note to please be mindful of your physical, mental well-being. Know that there's a whole community around you at CND. So if you're ever overwhelmed, reach out to people. We got each other. Our impact is also really coming from these relationships that we build and how we support each other. So I'm very excited to see you all at CND in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Beatrix. It's super helpful, and yeah, all these tips. And honestly, Youth Rise has done so much to expand youth involvement at CND, because for a very long time it was just limited to this youth forum, which we're still not quite sure who they are, but they were the only youth voice in the debates. And Youth Rise and SSDP and others have done absolutely amazing work to bring young people to CND to brief them on what's happening there. So do reach out to them if you're a young person and want to learn more about CND and how to engage. And another thing that Beatrix mentioned about the horrible coffee, yes, coffee is not great, but there's always like free tea and coffee from like the alternative development crowds, like from Thailand and Peru, I think. So do check these out. They're free. It's great. Let's enjoy it. And we've heard yesterday that Bolivia is going to have a showroom on coca products this year. So if you're there, do check it out because it sounds very exciting. Cool. So I'm now going to give the floor to Michelle. Michelle works at Skoun in Lebanon, and we have the pleasure to hear from her own experience at CND.
I was asked to speak in French. Usually I don't speak about my work in French. I work for the program of drug policy that's called Skoun. It's a harm reduction center that operates in Lebanon since 2003. We have services of treatment, harm reduction, education, and protection for all people who are drug users in Lebanon. And we defend also their rights. We advocate for their rights at local and international level. So last year was my first experience attending the CND in person. Before that, I was always attending online. It's very different and sometimes a bit overwhelming. Very different in person because there's so much happening at the same time. The CND is a space where you can really come across decision makers, political decision makers in the corridors. They are quite accessible, and you can meet the people you are fighting, the people that you are fighting against, and you can meet them, engage in conversation, and you can really kind of recognize the faces of your allies, your friends, and also your enemies and your opponents. So it's important to really prepare some key messaging of what you want to say in advance, because at the CND, you can meet the representatives from your country, and you can also make relationships with allies or also with people. Also try to find common ground with your friends or the people that you have agreements with. So last year was my first time participating in the CND, and it was also the first time that Skoun was organizing a side event. So we had applied to the OHCHR, and we had submitted to their flagship report and had organized 11 side events on this report. And we had organized one of these 11 events, which was about the drug use in periods of crisis and in humanitarian context. So organizing a side event is very overwhelming. It's very stimulating, very exciting, but also a lot of coordination, a lot of preparation, a lot of logistics. But it's a great space to begin to engage in dialogue and share perspectives and experiences and recommendations. So if you have an opportunity to organize an event, it's probably too late for this CND if you don't have your side event already set up, but you can think about it for the next years, the next sessions. It's a very long and tactic event. It's really a lot of sports. You have to stay stand up for a long time, running around, to stay very focused and receptive for a long time. So get some rest in advance, get some sleep, and if you go out at night after these long days, try to go back to the hotel or go back home a little bit so that you can be ready for the following day. Plan ahead which side events you want to attend, because there are 190, so it's really difficult to decide at the last minute. Try to schedule some of the meetings ahead with the key people that you want to engage with or that you want to meet up with, but stay flexible, because a lot of these meetings can happen in a very spontaneous way in the corridors, in the cafeteria. Wear comfortable shoes, have your business cards with you, and bring a lot of business cards, because you're going to be meeting a lot of people, and also bring some promotional materials for your side events so that people can remember you. You need the approval of the secretariat for any document that you want to do. I think that's the rule. But make sure to have a visual, a flyer, so that people remember to attend your event. What else? I just want to say also that if you are a smoker like me, there's only one place where you can smoke, and that's in a parking lot underground, pretty far. So if you want to consider quitting smoking, it's the right time to do that. And just another mention, the app is very useful, very helpful. You will have the link in the slide because it allows you to access information on all the side events, and you can create your own schedule with some alerts. And there's a map also of the spaces where the events are happening, because the space is huge. There's a lot of rooms and it's easy to get lost. Last thing I want to say is that this year we are also night side event, which will be held on the 13th, Thursday at 3 p.m. and it'll be about the gender equality and country vulnerabilities in drug policy. So we will invite you to join this side event, and please come and attend, and I am willing to answer any of your questions if you have any.
Merci beaucoup, Michelle. Thank you so much. That was great. And thanks for all the tips. And yes, CND is exhausting. So do take time off. Make sure that you eat lunch. Make sure that you rest for dinner. But yeah, it is very intense. So taking downtime is also really important. Also, because there's so many lovely people there. I mean, there's a lot of really annoying people too, but there's a huge community of drug policy reform people. So it's tempting to just spend a lot of time together, but it's also important to rest to make sure that we're operational for the rest of the week. Okay, so now our final panelist, at least in this, before I give the floor to Juan, is Silvie. So she is from this amazing organization called Metzineres. And I think Silvie was your first CND last year, right? So I'll give you the floor, and very looking forward to your experience sharing.
Hi, I'm going to speak in Spanish to honor my birthplace, and so that we can have linguistic justice, which is so important in these times. So my name is Silvie Ojeda. I work with Metzineres. It's an organization that offers services for women and gender non-conforming people in the center of Barcelona. And Metzineres is an organization founded by Reich, who also founded harm reduction programs in Colombia. So it's an organization that has a lot of reach in Latin America, where it also carries out constant research and advocacy work. So to tell you a little bit about my experience, I first learned about the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, working with activists in Bogota, in Colombia, and someone who is currently the ambassador for the Human Rights Council in Geneva and representing Colombia. So I was able to get to know the different bodies of the United Nations. That's where I started participating specifically with the Human Rights Council. And afterwards, with the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, and also the Commission on Women and Gender. And my first contact was really about understanding how things worked, understanding the differences between member states, non-member states. So that was what my first contact really dealt with, and also getting to know the different side events hosted by civil society. And last year, I had the opportunity to go to the Commission on Narcotic Drugs for the first time, which was a marvelous experience. And it really impacted my work directly because it was the first time that I could actually put all of that knowledge that I had been working on for years to use. And especially when it came to advocacy within United Nations bodies. And so I was able to really put them into practice. And it was very interesting because the last year's Commission on Narcotic Drugs was very difficult and very agitated because in terms of everything going on with the negotiations and the resolutions. And it was very interesting to see how the plenary session worked and how the different sessions worked. And because being there when one gets to the plenary session and where things really happen. And at the beginning, you don't really understand what's happening. How are the decisions being made? Because it's a lot of really fragmented chatting and talking. But then when they start to pass the resolutions and vote on the resolutions, you realize that they're going sentence by sentence, approving or rejecting each component of what is being proposed there. So in the plenary session, during the prohibition of new substances, sometimes the president of the session couldn't even pronounce the substances properly. So for us, as members of civil society who engage in advocacy and activism, we know that they're prohibiting 19 different new substances, which are well known to us. But it was very interesting to see how they struggled to pronounce them. So I recommend that you speak a lot with a lot of people and that you try to attend the plenary session as well as the side events. I think that the side events are very important and very interesting, but I think that someone going for the first time to the commission should go to the plenary session for sure. For me, this part in terms of understanding how the decision-making works and how the UN bodies work, I think it's very important. There's also the participation of the civil society, which is great to see because they have a state-of-the-art developments on different issues having to do with drugs. And so everything from our perspective. So for example, it was very important, interesting to see the perspective of the indigenous population of Australia. So that was really interesting for me because for me, indigenous, I had knowledge of other indigenous communities, but not of this one. So it was great to see how perspectives are different from different parts of the world. And though I think going to side events is very important, I think that it's important as well to open your perspective a little bit and go to see other topics and other issues and understand what's going on in other territories and other areas. So for example, I went to a side event on the African region, which was very interesting for me. And I would recommend that when you look at the program, you should pick the side events that are interesting for our specific work, but also it's interesting to go to events that that you've never considered before or that you didn't know existed or that are new for you. I also think that it's a space with a lot of emotion when it comes to the small victories that are secured. They're small, but they're important. So you have those small victories of networking, for example. It's a key space for networking, for speaking with colleagues, not just during the side events, but also in the cafeteria, during the evening events, and in every space available, really. And I also think that you will begin to understand a little bit how these spaces work, and that gives us a bit of a foothold to be able to better relate and interact with other UN bodies, whether it's the World Health Organization or other bodies of the UN. So I think it's it's a space for a lot of learning in that sense. And I think one more thing. So for us, it was very constructive and productive to create an advocacy plan or an advocacy schedule, so that because we know that we are not only in those spaces to learn, but also to keep resisting and to keep up with our struggle. So sometimes one goes there and then you feel a little bit frustrated because you feel like nothing changes, the years go by and nothing changes. So it's really working little by little with these tiny victories, taking it one step at a time. And I think that these are key spaces to be able to influence the policies, to construct alliances, build alliances, and it's important to participate in spaces such as the orientation by IDPC or other orientations run by other organizations. This is also very helpful to be able to strategize. And last year, when the consensus was broken, we were there. And that was an unprecedented experience for me to see how the conservative countries and the progressive countries were both doing the thing, and how there were those countries kind of stuck in the middle that were neither conservative nor progressive. And sometimes it's a bit confusing, and we kind of feel more grounded because we understand that they're confused too. And so it can be quite difficult to understand what is going in the plenary session. So I'll close with that. Thank you very much for listening. Metzineres will have a side event with ICERs as well. Um, it's called The South in the North and the North in the South. And it's about how to decolonize harm reduction to be able to combat criminalization that we are currently experiencing. So I'll leave that there, and thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you, Silvie.
Things to say there. One thing to say is a lot of NGOs are using the CND because you have the privilege of having all the drugs coordinators of the world in one room for a whole week, and they have nowhere to hide. So you can go and see them in the plenary room and say, hi, let's talk. And they can't really say no. So it's just a way to have them accessible to you. Sometimes, I mean, some NGO colleagues have told us that it was the first time that they were able to meet with a government official there because they refused to meet with them at home. So it's just an interesting way to do advocacy and to also further your own national level advocacy. It's not all about global advocacy. It's also a way to build bridges between different governments. So like governments that are more like-minded, governments that are less like-minded, and how can we bring them together with the help of other civil society colleagues or with the help of a UN agency. So there's like different ways in which we can also create space for discussions like that. And if you want to take a look at the trends in the CND and what has shifted over time, IDPC produces a CND proceedings report every year where we analyze what's happening at that year's CND and how that translates into change in comparison to other previous CNDs. So maybe Juan, you can put the link to the CND proceedings report from last year. Otherwise, it's on our website. But I encourage you to have a look at that because it's true, as Silvie said, last year was unprecedented. It was the first vote on a CND resolution in about 40 years. So it's thanks, Juan. So the link is now in the chat. So it's interesting just to come to this year's CND, bearing in mind what happened last year. And it also helps in terms of our advocacy and what we can push for there. So I'm going to give the floor to Juan now, who's going to run us through some of the key resources that are available for the CND as you navigate it throughout the week.
Thank you so much, Marie. I'm going to be quick because we are running out of time. So it's just to signpost many different resources that will help you navigate the meeting. One is, of course, the official documentation by the Commission on Narcotic Drugs. So if you go to the website of UNODC, there's a bit where there's the Commission on Narcotic Drugs. You'll find meetings in the current year. And then you can go to the 68th session. Sorry, I remember that I'm being translated, so I need to go a little bit slower. So you will have the program there, as well as something called the journal, which will have links to the different meetings, but also to the side events. Crucially, this year, the Committee of the Whole, the committee, will not be webcast, so will only be in person. The CND blog will do its best to, as usual, transcribe the conversations that take place there in the interest of accountability and transparency. You will also find in the official documentation of the CND the draft resolutions, as Marie mentioned. Another key resource is the Vienna NGO Committee guide. They produce it every year, and it's sort of like a mini Bible of things that you need to know in order to navigate the CND, with information about registration, side events, and also some that is a little bit harder, and some colleagues mentioned it already, like codes of conduct that are very particular to that space. It's not to cause fright, but it's definitely not what many of us are used to. So it's good to have that guidance on what is considered appropriate in that space. We also have an IDPC page on our website about the CND, and we will continue to update it with the latest information that we think is essential for civil society, including recordings of this webinar in English, Spanish, and French. And then we can go to the next page, Marie. We also have the CND app, which it has been running, if I'm not wrong, for 7 years. And now it's a web app where you will find, as I was including in the chat, text of resolutions from previous years. And this is really important because, as colleagues mentioned, also resolutions are negotiated on the basis of pre-existing language. So introducing new language is incredibly hard. So knowing what language has already been agreed upon is really useful to provide ammo to our own purposes, because there's also agreed language that is progressive and important to sustain. So have a look at the resolutions area. You also find a program of the side events, the plenary sessions, the Committee of the Whole sessions, the informal dialogues, the Vienna NGO Committee orientation meeting. So yeah, we try to make it a sort of one-stop shop of everything that you need to know to navigate this space, including a map, because it's a huge, strange building. So a map is always useful. I also wanted to talk about other resources that we have, like the CND blog that you see reflected on the screen. Since 2008, we have been transcribing discussions that take place at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, because all the way back in 2008, there weren't any sort of records of the conversations that were taking place. So in the interest of, again, accountability and transparency, we started producing the CND blog, which we continue till today. It is transcribed in real time. So we do our best to reflect the conversations. But of course, we cannot include everything. What is really interesting is that in parallel to our push for accountability and transparency, the institution has also sort of, I want to say ceded, but maybe acquiesced. So now, for example, the plenary meetings are available on UN Web TV, which is fantastic. The statements of member states very often, at least from the first item, sort of the opening segment, will be presented on the website of the CND. That is also an achievement. But in general, discussions remain relatively opaque, and the CND blog keeps its purpose in that sense. We also produce IDPC monthly alerts, like our monthly newsletter, which for the month of March is solely dedicated to CND. So next week, we will send a special alert in English, Spanish, and French, condensing all the information, consolidating all the information that you need in order to navigate the space as easily as possible. And yeah, if you have any other questions, please do not hesitate to use IDPC, the Secretariat of IDPC, as a resource. If we don't have the information, we definitely can signpost you to amazing people like my co-panelists who will have the information. There's a wealth of knowledge in this network of 195 members, and yeah, I invite you to use it. We also hold an orientation meeting on Sunday, and the morning session of that orientation meeting is open to all civil society, is only in person. So if you will be there and you're a civil society member, like a person who works for an NGO or a grassroots organization or whatever, please reach out, because you're very welcome to that session, which is like a CND 101, and we go a little bit more in depth into some aspects that we discussed today. But that's I think all that I had to present. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Juan. Thank you. And yeah, feel free to use all these resources. So I can't see more questions. There was one question in the chat from, let me just check it out. Sorry. It was about somebody who wanted to make an intervention in one of the side events. I think for these, you would need to reach out to one of the co-organizers. It's Azrat, who's asking, I want to participate in a speaking session. So some of the side events are hybrid in format, so you can just attend the side event. If you want to speak at one of these side events, then you would need to contact the organizers and check with them if it's possible to add you as a speaker. If you're not going to CND, there would need to be a hybrid side event or intervention by video. I'm going to give you one more chance to ask questions if there's any. And if not, I am going to put the last slide just so that you have our contact. Contact at idpc.net goes to the whole IDPC team. So we're not going to ignore you. Just use that and one of us will respond to you. Okay, so there's a question from Andrea. Yes, Andrea, I mean, this is part of our key advocacy. I mean, this is what we do every day, and what a lot of NGOs that are attending the CND do as well. We talk about this every time. That's why we go to CND, basically, just to make sure that this goes to the floor and it's not a bureaucratic, nonsensical meeting. And a lot of people who have been to CND have seen how the conversation has shifted thanks to the involvement of people who use drugs and other communities that are affected by bad drug policies around the world. So it's very slow progress, but the conversation is shifting. But we need obviously to keep the pressure on, especially now in moments where the world is crumbling, the multilateral system is crumbling. And so we really have to hold together, stick together, work in solidarity, and make sure that we continue the fight. So I hope that you will join us at CND. Yeah,
Marie, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just add that it's not only people who use drugs who are losing their lives because of those policies. Unfortunately, there is a very high percentage of people who do not use drugs but are impacted by law enforcement because of drug policies. So it's very interesting to bring that also. That's part of what we do too when we bring, because it's about people who use drugs, but it's also about people who do not and are also being impacted by this war on drugs. Sorry, but it's important from the producing side of the world to know that, you know, that these people dying also and not interested in using drugs, which it's important to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I hope we'll all be in sync in our messaging. As you know, civil society is also very broad at CND, so it's not only reform-oriented NGOs. So we just need to make sure that we have our reform-oriented points across, and that we combat criminalization and all forms of horrible human rights abuses that are committed in the name of drug control. Thank you so much to everyone. Thanks so much to our wonderful panelists. Thank you to our translators who have been there the whole time. And I wish you a wonderful rest of the day and hope to see you all in Vienna very soon. Bye, everyone.